This week on Africa Update, implementation of the national determined contributions, including adaptation financing and mitigation efforts, tops priority as deliberations at the 27th UN Climate Change Conference of Parties, COP27, continues in Egypt. How will resolutions at the conference impact on climate adaptation on the African continent? We'll hear from an environmental scientist, Dr. Yusuf Rigasa. Also on African Update, we tell the story of a Zimbabwean entrepreneur committed to turn waste into valuable recyclable goods. Plus, Roundup Africa, a highlight of some of the biggest stories on the continent. This is Africa Update on Trust Television, reaching you from Abuja, Nigeria's capital. I am Ayuba Ilya. Welcome to the program. Now, the rise in water levels and the consequent flooding, drought, heat waves are some of the indicators that the full effect of climate change might be upon us, perhaps much sooner than the world has expected, especially in developing countries, majority of whom are in Africa. 194 countries have since agreed to confront threats posed by climate change by setting goals to limit global warming to well below 2, preferably to 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels. However, implementation of national determined contributions and the provision of adaptation financing to developing nations to enable green energy transition leaves a lot to be desired. Since COP26 in Glasgow, only 29 out of 194 countries came forward with tightened national plans on meeting the target, with no implementation of the $100 billion adaptation financing to developing countries who are at the front lines. African leaders, supported by leaders from developing nations such as Bahamas, say that wealthy nations and big oil companies are steering global warming and are stunting Africa's economic growth. In response, Africa leaders are calling on the biggest polluters to pay up for the damages inflicted.
Leaders from emerging economies and poorer countries are using their speeches at Egypt's COP27 climate summit on Tuesday to criticise wealthy governments and oil companies for driving global warming, demanding they pay up for damages being inflicted on their economies. Prime Minister of the Bahamas, Philip Davis.
The realities of war, economic headwinds, the hangover from the pandemic, and competition among world powers cannot be used as justification not to confront these imminent dangers. Let's get real. It's only going to get worse.
Small island states, by increasingly violent ocean storms and rising sea levels, called on oil companies to shell out some of their huge recent profits, while developing African states called for more international funds. President of Rwanda, Paul Kagame.
The most valuable contribution that the developed countries can make is to reduce their emissions faster, while investing with Africa to build sustainable green power.
South African President Cyril Ramaphosa added that the continent needs a predictable, appropriate and at-scale funding stream and technological support. Senegal's President Macky Sall said poor developing countries in Africa would resist calls for an immediate shift from fossil fuels if it is needed to boost their economies.
Let's be clear. We are for the climate. We are in favor of reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. But Africa cannot accept that our vital interests are undermined on the matter of the energy transition.
The comments reflected the tension in international climate negotiations between rich and poor states, as delegates attended the second full day of the 2-week UN conference in Sharm el-Sheikh. Scores of other heads of state and government were scheduled to speak on Tuesday, but many of the world's biggest polluters, including the United States, China and India, were not on Tuesday's schedule.
All right, now to give more perspectives to this, I have in the studio an environmental scientist. He is a former CEO, Kaduna State Environmental Protection Authority, Dr. Yusuf Rigasa, to give his insight. Thank you so much for joining us on Africa Update.
Thank you for having me.
All right. All right, so let's start with the attendance at the COP27 this time around. We've seen key stakeholders not present at that conference. The Chinese president, for instance. China is one of the biggest emitters of the greenhouse gas, and then, you know, they are not there. So how significant is the presence of some of the key players?
I think it is very much significant because this time around, African countries have come together and they are demanding for, money. They have gone home. When they left the COP26 in Glasgow, there was an agreement between themselves and the developed countries, where the developed countries made a commitment to make available, about a minimum of $100 billion for mitigations and adaptations. And so far, this money has not been forthcoming, and a lot of countries are disappointed. So I think with regard to what you are saying, yes, we want all the rich countries to be there so that we can be able to speak in unity to them and demand what is due to us from them. Because Africans are not the major emitters, are not the major cause of climate change. And the developed world that has been responsible for this is not actually cooperating with those of us in Africa. So in that regards, I believe that it is a significant, it is a significant event that the Chinese are not showing up. We need their money. They need to come and open their coffers and roll out the money so that climate action can take off in Nigeria and Africa at large.
But why do you think that the implementation of some of the things that have been agreed upon is so slow? I mean, how much time do we have? We are not seeing as much commitment from the developed countries.
Yes, the world itself is dynamic, and for you to move forward in terms of climate change mitigation and adaptation, we have to open up our communities, we have to open up our institutions so that people can actually see that we truly need this infrastructure, we truly need this money to be able to build up resilience in terms of mitigations and adaptations in our community. Just take, for example, the flood events that happen all over Nigeria, from Jigawa to Bayelsa. Everybody is calling for action. But then it took a while for the federal government to even make an approval of just about 500 billion naira, which is very, it's a meager amount when you consider the quantum of the impact on the environment and on our communities. So certainly, Nigeria has a significant presence in that place, and without this money, we'll just be helpless, because it's not only the environment that we need to restore now, we equally need to restore the livelihood lost in this kind of climate change induced event. And if you look at the flood, people are only talking about the impact on the environment. If you look at the impact on food security, it's equally huge. The impact on the health of our communities is equally huge. The impact on our energy security too, that is also very huge. So we need to come together, open up our systems, and partner among ourselves within Africa and the developed countries to ensure that these mitigations are open to everybody, so that that can serve as a justification for our demand for more funding.
All right, now we've not seen implementation of the initial funds that have been committed to this, and now we're asking for more. How feasible is it really, with the whole Russia-Ukraine crisis going on, and a lot of distractions?
Yeah, in spite of the distraction, you also need to know that the whole world, it's not as if economically most of the developed world is not doing very well. And this money, they have put certain strings. It's not as if, it's not like cash and carry. If you want just $2 or $3, you just go and get it. There are strings attached to this money. If you look at the case of Nigeria, the federal government is doing very well. And if you look at the federal MDAs, they equally have structures that are working towards accessing these funds. But the climate change decks at state and local governments are mostly empty. So we need to come together. We need to build our own case. We need to communicate. We need to be open. We need to collaborate. We need to document all our needs in terms of mitigation and adaptations, very clear to each and every citizen of this country. That is the only way we can be able to put a bankable, document that we can present to the world. And the moment the world see it, then they will open, the vault and give us the money, to kickstart the implementation. But as long as we are working in silos, without the necessary linkages, the world will not be able to be on the same page with us. So we need to up our game. If you go to Sharm el-Sheikh, you will see a lot of representation from NGOs. You will see a lot of representations from the federal government and its MDAs. Some states, yes, most of them just go there for window shopping. They don't go there with concrete demands. And of course, I'm not aware of any local government that is going there to at least market itself, that it certainly needs this fund. So we need to come together.
So in other words, you are saying that we have not made a presentation that is convincing enough to demonstrate how badly we need
Yes, we've not been able to do that. We need to come together. We need to come together and speak in one voice. That is a problem nationally. That is equally the problem, within Africa. Everybody wants to go solo. And in this kind of a game, no, you have to collaborate. We learn from each other.
Okay, what do you say to the narrative right now that seem to suggest that, look, this is the burden of African countries. These are just poorer nations seeking rich nations to give them money and all of that. And no one is really talking about, not much emphasis is given to the moral obligation that is, involved here.
The demand for climate change fund is not an act of begging. It is a right. And well, there may be a moral aspect of it, but I believe that as long as we live on the same planet, then people must take up their environmental responsibilities. The environmental responsibility of the developed world is to ensure that they assist the less developed one in terms of building infrastructure, the necessary infrastructure for mitigation and adaptation. If we are not safe and comfortable in this world, there is no way any other person can also be safe and comfortable within the same planet. So if we act in unison, we'll have the same destiny. We want a better world for everybody.
Okay, just give us a picture of what exactly do we need to, fully build our infrastructure in a way that it will be, climate friendly, to adapt this adaptation that we're talking about. What do we need to do? What does it take to fully, transit?
If you look at the major issues at this COP27, the countries or people are talking about energy transition, the movement from fossil fuel to sustainable fuel sources, which we normally call renewable energy. And then there is also issue of climate financing, but for you to be able to access this finance, you need to go back to community level. You need to assess the vulnerability of communities to climate-induced environmental and socio-economic challenges. Just like if we take, for example, this flood. Yes, there has been a significant, flash flood event in various parts of Nigeria, but the exposure is not the same. Of particular note are two states, Jigawa and Bayelsa. Are you trying to say that this thing has not happened in Kaduna? Yes, it has touched the lives of some people in Kaduna. It has touched the lives of some people in Sokoto, in Adamawa, in Borno. But where we see significant impacts, particularly some of these two states or three states, Jigawa, Kogi, and Bayelsa. Now, once there is we have an inbuilt warning system. And this early warning system, as far as I'm concerned, is doing very well. Yes, we can improve it. And, some of these climate change financing can also be applied in terms of putting these early warning systems. But where we are normally weak is that we don't build resilience at community level. And that is where the highest impacts usually occur. So communities need to be assisted. And for government to assist them, somebody has to carry out a vulnerability studies and then reduce the outcome of this study into naira and kobo And that is to say, for example, the community, Lokoja metropolis, for example, if it want to protect itself against these flash flood events, it need to make investment in water channels, it need to build some embankments, it need to, provide alternative accommodation, for those at risk, things like that. When you build them, you can easily separate them into mitigations, which are the short-term solutions, and adaptations, which are the long-term solutions. Reduce all these solutions to Naira and Kobo. If the state cannot foot the bill, it goes to the federal government. The federal government has funding from central bank, from ecological funding,
okay.
So many sources. Now, where this funding is short, even within the country, that is when you make a case, to global community. Look, these are the adaptations and mitigations that we have to put in our country, but we are short of this amount of money. This is what we have put in, this is what we are short. Can you please put in this amount of money?
All right.
If you are transparent and you have clearly demonstrated that you are accountable, of course the global community will look into your presentations and make whatever money available to you so that you can be able to implement your commitments, your communities. That is how it is done.
To what extent do you think that the Russia-Ukraine war is slowing down climate action, especially in terms of the Western countries and developed countries meeting up their obligation?
As you see, the dominant issue this year is climate financing, and most of the countries that have made this commitment to provide this $100 billion a year, some of them are involved one way or the other in the Ukrainian war. So money that is supposed to go into climate action is now finding itself into a violent conflict between Russia and Ukraine. So we can only pray for rapid end to that conflict so that the world will come back to its senses and the developed countries will make this money available so that we will have a better environment and a better world for each and every one of us.
All right. Now, what will it take, what will it cost some of the major contributors of the greenhouse gas emissions to realize the target set to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius? What will it cost them, and whether there's enough commitment to make it happen?
You see, the commitment to provide the 100 billion a year is just to kickstart it. In Nigeria, yes, we have started something, and we need to build the inventory of greenhouse gases. We need to develop and build a framework for every emitter. Say, okay, this is your emission reduction target. At least the president has made a commitment in Glasgow for zero emission in 2060. And when we have this emission reduction target that is specific to every economic sector, which is reduced to every manufacturer or every oil and gas operator, then we can say, okay, we are ready to kickstart, an effective and functional emission reduction regime in Nigeria. But for now,
well, I'm talking about developed countries now. Right. Talking about some of the major contributors to the greenhouse gas emission in terms of their own national determined contributions. What will it cost them to actually cut down?
Well, for me, if those economies are usually very huge, they can, some of them can even create money from nothing. So I don't believe that it will cost them much. What we are demanding is less than 1% of their GDPs to be committed to improving the world. But if somebody is saying 1% of their economy, yes, it's huge, when you look at it from our own side, but from their own side, it's not too significant. It's not too much for something to give. And we are not begging them for it. We are asking them to give us this as our right. It is an environmental right. It is not a moral obligation anymore. So we need to talk in unison. Let us continue, to talk to them, and then hopefully they will listen, and let's work together, because I believe that they are not the owners of the world. Neither are we the owners of. It's a collective ownership, And if the world itself is a collective heritage, then we have to come together and ensure that it is actually sustainable and comfortable for everyone.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Yusuf Rigasa. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. All right. You're watching Africa Update on Trust Television. After the break, we'll take the story of a Zimbabwean entrepreneur committed to turning waste into valuable recyclable goods. Details of this and more after the break. Kinisani Ndlovu, a Zimbabwean entrepreneur, reports using personal resources to turn waste into valuable recyclable goods and aims to use his project to address the waste challenges faced by residents of the capital, Harare. Take a look.
Troubled by the plastic waste in the streets of his city, Bulawayo, Kinisani Ndlovu quit his lucrative construction business and is now using his backyard to recycle plastic into items used by school children.
In 5 years' time, Umhlaba Recycling will probably be producing sports equipment, recycled for educational purposes. You're mentioning your kids' counters, you're mentioning your book holders, and we're looking at sitting areas for school children, particularly outdoors.
He collects plastics from his neighborhood and from schools near his home in Bulawayo.
This program is so helpful because it keeps the school clean. Yes, and also the school children, since they always throw the bottles around, so by collecting these bottles, it clears all the dirt and the pollution also by the school.
For years now, authorities in Zimbabwe have struggled to dispose of plastic. Nkanyiswa Ndlovu, the cleansing superintendent of the city of Bulawayo, says his council is putting in place policies to encourage private companies and volunteers to go into the recycling business.
Plastic waste is one of the waste that is giving us serious problems as the city of Bulawayo, because everywhere where you go, you will meet plastic waste. In the streets of the CPD, in the residential areas, all over the place there is plastic waste. So it is indeed a serious problem in the city of Bulawayo.
The same is true for Zimbabwe's capital city of Harare, where Kinisani Ndlovu hopes to move and establish recycling there to fight plastic waste.
Now let's take a look at Roundup Africa. The United Kingdom has announced a significant increase in its financial support to the poorest African countries that bear the brunt of climate change. Speaking alongside African leaders at the COP27 in the Egyptian city of Sharm el-Sheikh, British Foreign Secretary James Cleverly confirmed the UK will provide £200 million to the African Development Bank Group's Climate Action Window, a new mechanism set up to channel climate finance to help vulnerable countries adapt to the impacts of climate change. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak had announced that the UK will surpass that target and triple adaptation funding from £500 million in 2019 to £1.5 billion by 2025. This funding package provided to the African Development Bank will be 100% earmarked for adaptation. The Prime Minister also confirmed that the UK is delivering on the target of spending £11.6 billion on international climate finance between 2021 and 2022 and 2025 to 2026. In a similar vein, the African Union welcomed the Netherlands' contribution of €110 million in support of the Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program ahead of the COP27 leaders event on accelerating adaptation in Africa. The Prime Minister of Netherlands, Mark Rutte, announced the financial commitment during a high-level meeting with Senegal's President Macky Sall, who is also the chairperson of the African Union, Patrick Verkogen, CEO of the Global Center on Adaptation, and the president of the African Development Bank Group, Dr. Akinwumi Adesina. Now, France and Germany have released €600 million to help the energy transition in South Africa as part of an investment plan approved at the COP27 in Egypt for a total of $98 billion. South Africa, France and Germany have signed loan agreements for 2 European nations to provide 300 million euros each in concessional financing to South Africa in support of the country's efforts to reduce its dependence on coal, the 3 countries announced Wednesday in a joint statement. France, Germany and the United Kingdom, the United States and the European Union had pledged the support of $8.5 billion with the ambition of making South Africa an example of cooperation in the fight against emissions in developing countries. In a similar vein, Namibia said that at the COP27 summit that it had secured over 540 million euros in climate finance from the Dutch government and European Investment Bank. One of the world's sunniest and least densely populated countries, Namibia wants to produce green hydrogen and position itself as a renewable energy hub in Africa. The Dutch grant is from infrastructure funding vehicle Invest International, while the facility from the European Investment Bank is to build green hydrogen and renewable energy projects in Namibia. President Hage Geingob said that the funds represented the largest amount of concessionary finance to combat the effects of global warming that his country had secured to date. Uganda will shorten the school term by 2 weeks to reduce daily contact among students and help curb the spread of Ebola, the education minister announced. Authorities have been struggling to contain the highly infectious and deadly hemorrhagic fever since the epidemic spilled into the capital Kampala, home to around 2 million people. This resurgence of the Ebola virus, which was made official by the Ugandan government on September 20, a first since 2019 in this East African country, has so far claimed 53 lives out of 135 cases of infection, according to official figures as of November 6th. The Rwandan government said a Democratic Republic of Congo Army fighter jet violated its airspace just 48 hours after a deal to defuse rising tensions between the two countries. The Congolese government has been facing an offensive by the armed group M23 in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo in recent weeks, which has reignited historic tensions with neighboring Rwanda, which it accuses of supporting the former Tutsi rebellion. Kigali has always disputed these claims and in return claims that the DRC is collaborating with Rwandan Hutu rebels. The DRC expelled the Rwandan ambassador in Kinshasa on the 29th of October. Now, President Emmanuel Macron has formally ended France's decade-long operation to fight insurgents in the Sahel. In a major speech at a naval base in Toulon, he said that some French troops will remain in the region. However, they will be there under new arrangements to be worked out with host countries. At its high point, Operation Barkhane saw some 5,500 French soldiers deployed in Mali, Niger, Chad, Burkina Faso and Mauritania. The announcement also represents a major shift in French strategic priorities brought on by the war in Ukraine and changing perceptions of the most important threat facing the country. And that's a wrap on Africa Update for this week. In case you've missed, you can always catch up across all our social media platforms. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I am Ayuba Ilya. Thank you for watching. Bye for now.